What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the magic stories as they're posted on Wizards' website. And this week, while there was information on the Battle Bond world of Kylem, as I mentioned last week, we are going to hold off on that for now because we wanted to use this week to do our Dominaria wrap-up. So there is no quick review at the beginning. Really, if you are not aware of the Dominaria stories, I still recommend that you stick around if you have read some but not all, regardless. I think that this is pertinent information because we're going to be talking about Dominaria as a whole, our thoughts on the stories, and looking outside of the stories and talking about what's been going on in Wizards of the Coast that led to these stories being this way. So, like I said, even if you have not read the stories, it shouldn't be too hard for you to follow. So, we had 12 weeks of stories. They were all written by Martha Wells, the guest author, if you will, of these stories, who wrote these stories. We did an entire video on Martha and her, like introducing her or her introduction to the Magic community. And that was through a text interview as well as a podcast interview, a Magic Story podcast interview. And we gave some of our thoughts on those. And one of the main things that I brought up that I didn't see a lot of people talking about, and that doesn't necessarily mean because no one was, I just didn't personally see it, was that from my reading of the text interview as well as my listening of the podcast audio interview, a lot of discussion was had on what background Martha was given with regard to the Dominaria stories. I feel like, overall, this was a poor time to bring in this kind of a writer, or this kind of an author, to a world with such established backstory, because you're bringing in somebody new who is not really aware of any of your lore, let alone even current stuff, let alone past lore. Now, overall, if we were to talk about it, I can say with confidence that I think Martha Wells is a fantastic writer and author. Saying nothing of Dominaria yet, saying nothing not of Dominaria yet. I think Martha Wells is a very good writer. As a writer, what are your thoughts on Martha Wells?
I wouldn't know, because I don't feel that these stories are a good representation of the writer that she is, with the amount of notoriety she has and her portfolio being the vast thing that it is. I really don't think it would be fair for me to judge that, you know, whether she is a good writer just based on these stories. Because I do feel that the last couple of stories, as I said in the other JaAR episodes, I do feel that she kind of found her groove with them, and that they did reflect what they needed to reflect and did do what they needed to do. I just don't feel that the rest of them really did. And I don't think it's fair for me to say that she's not a good writer just because it took her that long to figure out what it was that she needed to incorporate to make it feel right. Because as someone who is a creative person, I can understand that the creative process isn't always quite so cut and dry as do this project, you do it, and it's done perfectly well from the get-go. Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes it takes a while to figure out what you need to do and make it go smoothly. I do feel like she did find that point. I just wish it was earlier on in the process.
Yeah, and I mean...
And unfortunately, I'm not familiar with any of her other work, so I can't say one way or another.
And the way that, I mean, we found out through, as I mentioned, the earlier article and audio interview, we found out that the way that Martha wrote these stories was she wrote like drafts and then presented those drafts to whichever members of the narrative team she happened to be working with at the time. And they would give her feedback on what she needed to fix or what she needed to change, and give it, you know, ask for another edition or draft or whatever you want to call it. And therein lies a lot of the confusion that I feel like people in the community ended up having with these stories. Because Martha, not Martha, because the stories themselves were full of characterization confusion. And by confusion, I don't mean that she was confused, maybe she was. I mean that us as readers, both Amy and I, people in the comments of our videos, as well as
general internet
people in the community, Reddit, Twitter, etc., were just like, what? Why would Liliana say that? Why did Chandra do that? Why was Gideon like this? Characterization of your main characters, right? This is not, oh, Tiana was introduced last week, but this week she's saying that. I don't feel like that's really like her. No.
Yeah, no.
I'm talking about established characters who we have seen quite a bit from in the past and who we're gonna see quite a bit from in the future, the very near future. Actual Gatewatch members. And then you have just straight up continuity issues, right? I've heard a lot of discussion about the difference between liches and zombies, the difference, and as well as timeline issues. And it led to some discussion between Amy and I off camera about whether the world of Ixalan was truly on a different time track than Dominaria was, and I don't...
And I think that's a possibility.
And I truly don't. which is, as I said...
But even if it is, right, it doesn't make sense that it would not have been discussed.
Yes. And
in order to make the readers understand why that time-lapse issue had occurred.
Yes, and it's not the difference between 3 weeks and a month. It's the difference between 2 to 3 weeks and 5 months.
Yeah.
Which is a massive difference. That's huge. I mean, I don't have to tell most of you. If you are understanding the words that I'm saying, you understand the concept of the difference between 2 to 3 weeks and 5 months.
Yeah.
Right? Unless you have only been alive for 5 months and you don't fully understand that. But those of us, I mean, you think back to what you were doing 2 weeks ago versus what you're doing 5 months ago. It's a lot harder to think about what you were doing 5 months ago. You got to go, wait, but when was that? Versus, oh, 2 weeks ago, of course, I remember that was this, that, whatever. It's a huge difference. And there are people who could argue that with things like Dominaria, if you were to, you know, if you were to read the story and you were to say, they traveled from Jamura to Urborg and they said it took 3 days, but based on the geography of the plane, I think it would actually take closer to 4 or 5. Don't get me wrong. There are people out there who would do that kind of thing, and I do not disparage them for that because they are those kinds of fans. They are those kinds of Vorthos. I am not that guy, but that doesn't mean that those other people are not entitled to do that. But the reason I bring it up is because I think that that is a little too particular, and I think that getting upset at something like that, where you're like, oh, keep your continuity, wizards, what's wrong with you? That might be a little bit far of a stretch. I haven't heard that from anyone. But the reason I bring it up is because there are people who were like, what the hell is going on with your continuity? Jace was on Ixalan for 5 months, and then Chandra going from planeswalking from Amonkhet to Dominaria. We have day-to-day movings of her, and it took her 2 to 3 weeks. And then Jace shows up, who was gone for 5 months.
Yeah.
So how the hell does that work?
They all finished on Amonkhet on the same day.
Exactly. At the same, within minutes of each other.
Yeah.
So what the hell is any of that about? So that's why I believe Amy thought of the time differences between planes. I don't believe that that's how that works. And yet, if Amy is correct, I fully agree with you that it should have been explained in some way.
Yeah.
You know,
because people aren't just going to come to understand that. They need to be told.
Now, I'm not going to reiterate it. Go back and watch last week's episode, but I have not mentioned the Jace characterization, despite the fact that that was a huge discussion in the community following his 2 appearances in the Dominaria story. Go back and watch our video last week.
Yes, please.
Check the episode number below, and then go find the episode prior to this one. I might have it linked at the end. That will describe why I have not brought up the Jace characterization issue as an issue. But, and I encourage you to read the comments section of that video as well, because people have been sounding off in the comments, and I, as always, we really appreciate any and all opinions regarding anything that we talk about.
Yes.
But with those characterization issues, with those continuity complaints and issues and errors, a lot of people have said it, and I agree with what a lot of people have said. I don't put that on Martha Wells. Martha Wells is working with people from Wizards of the Coast. It's their job to be the ones to know, oh, 5 months versus 3 weeks is a huge deal. Oh, for the people that feel this way, our main character, the face of Magic the Gathering, probably shouldn't be such a dick. Gideon, who is going to play a large part and has played a large part. Maybe we should make sure that what he says and does follows along with his established character arc, because it has to continue even if he dies on Ravnica, because any one of them or all of them could. But even if he does, there's 2.5 to 3 sets that he has to exist in before the moment where he would likely die if he did. So you still need to continue his arc. He still needs to be an established, possibly likable character, and so you need to portray him appropriately. And that goes, I bring up Gideon and Jace as examples, not because they are the only ones. Liliana and Chandra count as well. Hell, Ajani and Nissa count. By the way, because we're here and it's JaAR and M19 hasn't started yet, let's not forget that Nissa is a better planeswalker than Ajani.
Yes.
But that counts anybody. Teferi, Jaya, Karn, who cares? You should keep continuity with your characters. And I said it 14, 15 weeks ago that I didn't believe that Martha read the books.
Still feel that way.
100% still feel that way. Because, and I said then, and I still believe it now, that's a lot of reading to do. And I'm sure that if Martha is a good enough businesswoman, have no reason to doubt that she is, that she would be asking to be paid for the amount of time that it would take her to read all of those stories. And Wizards of the Coast as a company I would doubt, be foolish enough to offer to pay her to read all of those stories, because that's a lot of reading to do. A lot of reading.
But then you seriously can't even get one person from the past who knows these stories at least a little bit.
Well, so that's where we bring up, we have not delved into the Magic Story podcasts yet. We will, hopefully, very soon. Not this week, though. But you had Kelly Diggs and Ethan Fleischer doing those podcasts with Blake Rasmussen. Kelly Diggs and Ethan Fleischer are those guys who the hardcore Vorthos go to them with questions, right? They go to those Magic Story podcasts to learn about the geography of the plane, because that damn sure wasn't in the stories, and I wouldn't have expected it to be in the stories. But it is a plane, it was the original plane of Dominaria, or of Magic the Gathering, excuse me, that then led to the multiverse. And so you had history, backstory, legends, etc. from that plane that needed to be resolved. I mean, look at all the saga cards and stuff. All of those things, there are many people, as Amy just correctly pointed out, there are many people who read those stories, there are many people who loved those stories, and who could cite you chapter and verse from those stories. Now, granted, that doesn't necessarily mean that Kelly Diggs and Ethan Fleischer are good writers, but what it does mean, and it doesn't mean that they're not either.
Right.
I'm not trying to disparage either of them. What I'm saying, though, is that if you have people who are that knowledgeable on Dominaria, or with regard to Dominaria, on your staff, they should have been the ones working with Martha. They should have been the ones talking to her and telling her, no, Teferi wouldn't say it like that, or you should play up Teferi, he's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Not even because, and this is a whole other can of worms, and I will mention the phrase, and then I will move on, because of who I am. I'm not going to delve any further into this, but there is a representation issue with Teferi. And I feel like a company might want to play up Teferi as a character. It would be nice for some players to see someone who shares their skin color, who is a redeemable character.
Yeah.
Who is someone who is good at heart, and who may not have had the best history in the world, but who is regaining his spark. There's a huge redemption arc possibility there. I would think you would want to run with that. Again, they don't pay me, I don't write these stories, and there's probably a good reason for that. But that's why I said I was just going to touch on it and move on. If you have experience or feelings or thoughts on that, as with anything, leave it in the comments. I just don't feel like I have enough expertise or opinion to delve any further into that particular discussion. Then you have, like I was saying, but you have guys like Kelly Diggs and Ethan Fleischer, and probably many others. Allison Lors and Blake Rasmussen talked quite a bit in the past about their love for different older characters, Baron Sengir and things like that. That's 4 people right there. Any of them could have, should have been able to say, you know, maybe play up Teferi a little bit more. Here's a little bit of, you know, the Cliff Notes version of Teferi, the Cliff Notes version of Karn or Jaya. You wouldn't have to have Martha read the stories, although, as I said then, and I'll say again now, if I were in Martha's shoes, I would have wanted to have read all of those stories.
Me too.
Because if I'm coming into an established fandom, even if most of my readers, according to the company that I'm working for, even if I'm assuming that most of my readers are new, they may have seen some of the older cards, maybe not necessarily the novels. But I would still want to do those characters justice.
Or they might be trying to find the old novels so that they can at least catch up on some of the reading before the set comes out. I mean, that's what we kind of attempted to do. Mm-hmm. It didn't work very well.
No, we got a third of the way there of the target that we had set for ourselves,
right,
which was a very low bar.
Right. But, you know, there are people who, knowing that these stories were coming out, probably hopped online and said, let me find as many of these books as possible and read as many of them as possible, and probably took the time to actually do a lot of that. And it's a huge shame that the author of these new stories did not.
Yeah. And again,
it really just speaks, in my mind, to how little Wizards actually cares about the Vorthos.
And that's
part of the community.
Yes, and we will delve further into that as our kind of bombshell mic drop at the end of the episode, because there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
A lot. Stay tuned. I wanted to briefly touch on, because this has also been a rather large topic of discussion, and I wanted to give our opinions on it and then give you guys a chance to sound off as well. We had legendary creatures on Dominaria in the card set of Dominaria, and you had name drops all over the place. And it was funny because to me it started with Lyra, Dawnbringer. She's a mythic in the set. She's a legendary creature, and we met her when we met Tiana, because Tiana was talking to Lyra, and Lyra had like 3 lines. I think Lyra may have talked to Liliana as well. But like she had like 3 or 4 lines across like 2 stories, and then that was it. Even though if you look, at least at the time of recording, or the last time I checked, she was like one of the top 10 most expensive cards in the set. Because she's insanely good. I mean, the card's so good. But in the story, she was given like 2 lines. Or like I said, 4 lines, whatever. That was a name drop. Baird was mentioned. The white uncommon, it's not, is it Ghostly Prison on a Stick or something like that? Where you have to tap mana to attack with your creatures while he's on the field. Like, that's another example of a name drop. He was there to help out Liliana and Gideon. He said 2 lines, pointed them in a direction, and they were gone. And that was it. That was all we saw of him. We talked about Yargle at length. When it happened, we thought originally we were afraid it was going to be super pandery. Martha and or her connection with the narrative team did a good job of representing Yargle. I thought that as a meme character, as a fan favorite, that they did a good job. We mentioned that.
Yeah, they did a good job of making it actually a significant part of the story instead of just well, we'll drop him in there to please everybody.
So, like Muldrotha or Urgaros.
Yes.
Yes. So, Muldrotha as well, which was just Slimefoot looking over the edge and going, hey, can you help? And then Muldrotha just appears.
Yeah.
Bigger than Yargle, takes down Yargle, and then you don't find out what happens, but there's just... seemingly there's just a giant Muldrotha somewhere now. Okay. And then you have Urgaros the Empty One, who you find out about him because he flies out. Everybody's afraid of him. Liliana's like, oh, he's a specter. I can control... oh, he's empty. Which, hence the Empty One. And that's about it. Like, he's scary. It's hard to beat him. So... I don't have as big of a problem as some people online that I have seen with the name drop cameos, because I thought it was kind of nice to be like, oh, that person, right? You had other people who were more warranted to be in the story. I would put Yargle in that category of people who are more, or characters that are more warranted to be there. Quende was another one that I enjoyed him in the flashback of Teferi's story. Mentioning that he was a descendant of Majetta the Lion. That was really cool. I liked that because it tied back to an older card, but it also showed off a legendary creature. You got to see Quende's motivations behind why he's a card in the set, why you should care. Whisper, I think, kind of falls halfway between the two. I saw a little bit of hate for Radha being included in the final story. Amy and I already mentioned our bias behind Radha because we enjoyed her in the Time Spiral story. And she was not... I think she was different because she was not a Yargle, a Muldrotha, an Urgaros who were new to Dominaria. Yeah. This was an established character that they threw in as a cameo, which, again, people who liked and were looking forward to seeing Radha since she was a card in the set. I thought it was nice to have her, but again, I don't put her in the same class as an Urgaros or a Whisper because those are new characters that didn't necessarily need to be there. Lyra and Baird kind of as well. Do you have any overarching opinions on the cameos? I think you were a little bit harsher on them than I was. But.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them felt unnecessary. I was happy to realize that Radha was in it. Less happy to see how little she was in it.
Yep. That she wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
That could have been anybody. Mm-hmm. Anybody. Because all that she did that was Rada-esque was throw that blade into Whisper's face.
Right.
And arguably anyone can throw a knife. Anybody that has a knife
She's better at it.
I mean, that's not wrong. We know that as her character, like knowing her character, but you didn't need her. Right. You didn't need that to be her. So, whatever. That's how I feel on it. Again, I'm not as strongly opinionated as some on the cameos. I thought that when they happened, it made me half smile. Or I was like, oh, I know that card. I have a couple of those. Oh, that's cool. But then when it was over, I was like, wait, they just threw in Baird for nothing? Like, why the hell was he there? What was the point of that? Are we going to see him again? Same thing with Lyra. Arguably, same thing with Danitha. I really thought we would see Danitha again. You go back and watch that old JaAR, I said that. When we saw Danitha, I was like, cool, maybe we'll see her again, and her home of Benalia will be getting taken over by the Cabal, and she'll realize that she should have gone with the Weatherlight all along. I truly thought that back then. Because I was like, to me, I was like, why else would they have put her in there? Well, because they were name-dropping. Yeah. And so, again, I don't have as strong of opinions, but I still feel like, you know, I think it depends on the day. Whether I think that it was cool to include or whether I think that it was a little bit of a waste of time. If you have strong opinions either way, or if you're in the middle like me, as always, let us know.
Yes, please leave it in the comments.
Now, we move on to the final point. Like I said, the mic drop ending of this video, unless you had anything else before that.
Oh, I thought we were going to talk about the interview. No?
Yes. That's part of it. Yes.
Okay.
So on Gathering Magic, Vorthos J, who we've brought up many times here, incredible member of the Vorthos community, did an interview with the newest member of Wizards of the Coast in terms of the story team, and that's Nick Kelman. And what Nick's job is now is to basically be in charge of the story as it relates to the guest authors that they have for these stories. So, Martha being the first, but you've got multiple others coming. The M19 announcement will be made, I believe, the day that this video comes out, who the author is for the M19 stories.
Which I thought was weird. I didn't realize that they would do lore for an M19 set.
So M19 is seemingly the schemes of Nicol Bolas, past and present.
Oh, interesting.
And so going into Ravnica, as we now know we are,
yes,
it makes sense.
Okay, yeah. That sounds kind of cool, actually.
It does, and it'll be interesting to see how much canon is put into the M19 stories, where if you read those, you will better understand what's going on Ravnica with Bolas's plans. So I'm curious to see how that works out. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we do that, there's one other thing I wanted to bring up, because I've brought this up a million times. If you are a longtime JaAR viewer, this is something that frustrates me to no end. Last week, and I didn't mention it last week because, as always, I like letting the stories stand on their own.
I don't actually know what you're going to say.
And then I like letting the stories stand on their own. And then I like doing the overall stuff after the fact. So here we are for the Dominaria wrap-up. Let's talk about what happened in the world of Magic last week. The finale of the Dominaria stories came out. This is your big return for your 25th anniversary to Magic's original plane. You're going for the nostalgia hit. You want people to be excited and looking forward to it. And yet the day you release your finale story, as you've done so many times in the past, they released Battle Bond previews, M19 news, and MTG Arena announcements. All three of those all came out on the day that the finale did. Why? Why would you have the finale of your Dominaria story come out on the same day as those three big, highly anticipated announcements? Unless it's you truly saying, well, this is clearly over, we can stop focusing on Dominaria, let's move on to the next thing. you couldn't wait a week? I get that Battle Bond previews were this past weekend at the time of recording. So I get that you would need to get some Battle Bond information out there. But good Lord, why?
Yeah.
Why put out so much new information the day of your finale? Because from a meta perspective, which I appreciate looking at things from a meta perspective on occasion, because I think it allows you to step back and look at the bigger picture. If you look at things from a meta perspective, sure, Wizards puts out announcements and you can go to Daily MTG or to the mothership, to Wizards' homepage, and read up on all of the articles and all the things that came out, as well as all of the creators that Wizards is featuring that have done deck techs and interviews and things like that. But Wizards is also aware, because again, they feature them on their website, that there are creators. I won't even say like us, because we are not
bigger creators than us.
Bigger, more prominent creators than ourselves. Cover the news. They cover the MTG news on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, depending on who they are. And that is a great service that is done for the community, because it's that group of creators that kind of compile all of that information and then put it into all different forms, depending on who the creator is, for the fans, the fan base to absorb.
Right.
If you have a finale story, you should let that finale story have its own spotlight. Because last week's story wasn't bad. We said it wasn't bad when we reviewed it ourselves. And yet, it may not have been as widely discussed because you had so many other things going on that day.
I will say, I wonder, I don't know if there's data somewhere. I mean, I'm sure Wizards has it, but I doubt that it's public information of, like, the volume of people that they actually get reading the stories. Like, maybe people always read the first story and always read the last story, but they don't really read the stories in between.
Interesting.
So maybe their thought process there was, oh, people will be paying attention to this final story.
Kind of no matter what.
Right. And so if they're paying attention to this final story, then that's when we're going to make the other announcements too, so that they're there for them.
Yeah,
so that they... Or vice versa.
So
if
that
they're there for those announcements, maybe they'll read that final story.
That's a really good point.
Because it's all happening together.
No, that's a really good point. Because if you get them onto the website to look at one article, they're going to see all the others. That's a very good point. And not something that I... Oddly... Not something that I had thought of, even though now that you mention it, makes perfect sense.
It's literally not something I had thought of until just now either. Because I felt the same way you felt, which was, why are you overshadowing the final story of a plane that's supposed to be, like, your most prominent plane, the plane that you visited the most, the plane that the first however many years of this game took place on. You brought in a new, you know, acclaimed author to write these stories, and then come the final story, you're just plopping a bunch of other news on top of it, as if to say it doesn't matter. So that's how I felt too. But I literally just thought that actually kind of makes a lot of sense. If you think that people aren't listening, people aren't watching most of the time, and this is the one time that you think they will be, you're going to pile all the information on at the same time in the hopes that that one person will get it all.
And like,
instead of missing some of it.
And like I said, that's a really, really, really good point, and it's something, like you said, that I had not thought of. But it does raise a point, though, for me, that if I'm Martha Wells, if I'm whoever they get to write the M19 story, whoever they got to write or get to write the Ravnica stories, that's something that I'd keep my eye on. Like, if it does bring more traffic, great. And I'm sure that that's explained in a business sense to the author. But if it doesn't,
maybe it's explained. Who knows?
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
But if it doesn't bring more eyes, if you truly are masking the finale, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a big problem, because if I'm that author that you contracted to write those stories for you, and there's a little bit of a hope of a quid pro quo of, you know, I'll bring my fan base to your game and you bring your fan base to my stories.
Right.
Why would I want my hard work on your stories to be disrespected like that? And again, that's if you subscribe to the way I was thinking about it, not the way that Amy just kind of had the realization of, because again, if it brings more traffic, then it makes more sense as opposed to less.
Right. And I mean, they can figure that out based on looking at the information that they gather from just their website.
Oh,
to
yeah.
see, like, okay, so if somebody goes on this website this day, are they looking at, you know, are they taking the time that day to look at everything that's on the website? Or are they coming back day in and day out and just looking at one or two things on the website?
Yeah.
And so if they see that it's a lot more people go on less frequently but look at more things when they're there, that might be the reason why they would decide to do it that way.
Right. So that's all of that. I had forgotten that last point. So back to the interview discussion
Yes.
that Vorthos J had. Apologies. But that interview was to introduce us to Nick and to kind of show us where Wizards is planning on going. That's the future of Magic stories, right? It's to show us where these stories are going in the future and what role he plays with regard to that. And he is the liaison, the person, the go-between between the Wizards staff and the authors that they bring in. Now, as I'm going to put it, he is the story director as opposed to the art director. So the art director, this is our big discussion for the end of the video. Wizards has had a model recently. I don't even want to say recently. That we have watched multiple videos from Wizards discussing their business model in terms of artists for the cards. It is very typical in the comic book industry, the card industry, things like that, to have contract for hire artists.
I mean, it's very common in the art industry to have that be the way that you go about making money if
Right.
you are an artist,
Right.
is you just work as a contract.
Yeah.
A contractor for whoever is hiring you at the time.
Yeah, doing commissions.
That is, although it is awful, I think, it is a common and well-known and typical.
It's the standard.
Yeah.
It's seemingly the industry standard.
Right.
For that kind of thing. And there have been, I follow some people on Twitter who have talked about, you know, the abuse that can come within that.
Yeah.
Of people kind of abusing artists and complaining that they're asking too much money, even though this is their livelihood. And so I agree
Yeah.
with Amy's point on that. But regardless, and that is not us saying that Wizards does that. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they do commission art from artists and they do contract those artists. I am not saying that they abuse them or underpay them. That is no knowledge that I have, nor is it anything that I have heard from any of the authors that we have met. In fact, I've only heard positive things. So,
artists that we've met, not authors.
oh, what, did I say authors?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, artists that we have met. They have had only positive things to say.
Yeah.
So, that being said, that out of the way, I'm not here trying to bash anybody. I'm just trying to pass along some information as we see it.
Right.
Because we are not insiders. We do not know these things for a fact by any means.
No.
This is just
the way we see things, and this is our review show, so that's unfortunately what you're getting from this video.
well, and it's our review show where we ask for all of your opinions as well.
Yes.
So if you want to voice your opinions, or if you have knowledge and want to let us know, That's what the comments are for. Yes. Feel free to check us out on Facebook or Twitter. Down in the description box below is our links for those, and you can talk to us there too. But with this new structure that Nick discussed with Jay, I don't know of a more grandiose way of doing it. So I'm going to read off some names that you may recognize or that you may not.
Depending on how long you've been, I don't know.
Reading the stories, following along with Wizards in general,
right,
following along with JaAR.
Being in the Magic community, you know, whatever.
Mm-hmm. You have names like Kimberly Krynas, like Michael Yu Chow, Mel Lee, Ari Levitch, Chris Latois, Ken Troop, Kelly Diggs. There are probably many others that I'm not thinking of, or that I just didn't include. Many of these names, I am not certain on Ari Levitch or on Ken Troop, but on everybody else, Kimberly, Michael, Mel, Chris, and Kelly, within the last year to 2 years, they worked at Wizards of the Coast. They wrote stories for the stories for Wizards of the Coast, for the weekly story releases, whether they be pure standard sets or commander sets or things like that. Many of them were part of the Magic Story podcasts that we did reviews on, like I said, probably about 1.5 years ago at this point. They are all gone now. Like I said, not positive on Ari Levitch or Ken Troop, but I have not heard from them in quite some time with regard to the stories and or things like Inside R&D videos or whatever, what have you, through Wizards. That doesn't mean that they're not still there. I just haven't heard from those two. Everybody else I know for a fact has left. Now, that also...
left or...
Well, I was going to say, that also is for different reasons. Some of them got new jobs. Some of them were seemingly let go. The way that they mentioned it, if they mentioned it, it was, you know, I am leaving, I'm sad to go, and now I'm looking for a new job. Which doesn't say to me, I left to pursue other opportunities. Because usually, and this is not automatically the case, but as a guy who looked for work in the past 2 years in the United States, you would probably want to have a job before going to look for a new one, because money is something that's important for you to have in your life. And so having a job while looking for a job is always easier than not having one and worrying about paying your bills, etc. And again, that's not any particular person that I named that I'm talking about there. That's just, if somebody says, I'm leaving and now looking for work, to me what that says is that it wasn't their choice to leave.
Right. And the company didn't tell them with a lot of advance notice that this was going to be a thing that they were going to have to do.
And again, as Amy pointed out, I could be wrong. I could not be wrong. It's our show. I'm giving you my opinion. If you have inside information, let us know. If you just have an opinion and you think we're way off base, let us know. But the route that Nick described in the interview seems to be the route that Wizards has been taking with their artists, and now they're taking it with their authors. Because I mentioned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. 7. Again, unsure on 2 of them.
Probably more.
Right. I'm unsure on 2 of them, whether they're there or not. I'll probably, that'll be the last time I mention it. But that's 7 people who had likely full-time jobs at Wizards of the Coast that now no longer have those full-time jobs at Wizards of the Coast.
Or probably any jobs at Wizards of the Coast.
Right, I'm sorry, yes. That no longer work for Wizards of the Coast. And with that, if I am Wizards of the Coast, that is a positive in terms of my business. because that is 7 less people that I have to pay a full salary to. Likely that I have to pay benefits to. 401ks, retirement packages, etc. Because that's how business works. Especially with full-time jobs and with how that works, it's expensive for a company to have employees, but without employees, most companies can't run, so you need that. But they were able to eliminate 7 jobs. And they hired Nick, and or promoted Nick. I'm not familiar with him being within the company, but I believe, if I remember correctly, he's rather young.
Yes.
And so I believe he was a new hire to this position, which, again, this is typical with businesses. I cannot guarantee that this is what Wizards is doing, but with businesses in general, typically if you are letting go established people who have been there for a very long time and hiring new people, that is good for you as a business because those people who have been there for a longer period of time have likely gotten some form of a raise over the many years that they've been with your company, maybe multiple raises, annual raises, if you will. Whereas this new person who's coming in, you can start at a much lower rate, especially if they are much younger, because they have not come from a job where they had a higher salary, where they want that salary to, at minimum, stay the same, if not go up from their prior positions or prior jobs.
Right. And in this day and age, it's much more normal for a younger person to have not had a job where they actually made decent money, because nowadays jobs don't pay decently. Not in this country.
Right, unfortunately. And so, with that, look at what the company has done. Again, this is our reading between the lines, no inside information whatsoever. But look at what the company has been able to do. They have been able to eliminate 7 different people from their organization and hire 1. And then, on top of those now 6, arguably, net eliminations, they are now contracting or commissioning authors for their stories. And if Nick is truly the only go-between with regard to these authors and the storylines themselves, he is one person working with all of these authors. Now, these authors are only working for, I guess with 4 main sets a year, you argue that they work for 3 months at a time because you can have them going quarterly. There's probably some overlap going on there with people who are writing. The person who's writing for M19 may currently be overlapping with the person who's writing the first Ravnica set, etc. Maybe the second and the third, whatever.
But realistically, these people are, if they're at all like Martha and they're writing, 12 stories, that's 12 stories you're paying them for instead of a full-time job.
It's 12 stories combined with any research that goes into it beforehand.
Yes, which obviously wasn't enough.
Well, that's with that one. And with Ravnica, it's less information, but it is still some.
Yeah.
Because there are novels relating to Ravnica as well as stories from Return to Ravnica, from the original Ravnica trio of sets and the Return to Ravnica trio of sets. Plus, as Martha did, you have to read current stuff because you have to understand what Bolus's plans are, where he got things like the Planar Bridge and the Immortal Sun and his Eternals, etc.
And you also have to know enough about the current characters, the Gatewatch and the latest that they're up to
their
lives at this point.
Yeah, their relationships with one another,
right.
etc. And with all of that, they're contract employees. So as I mentioned, sure, you don't have to pay them as much as you would pay a full-time employee. You don't have to pay them benefits.
Right.
You don't have to pay them 401ks, disability, things like that. That I'm not actually certain of. I don't. You're the business person.
I think that depends on the company.
That's true. So.
But it's not likely that a writer would end up with disability money from their job.
Right. So here's
it's not a particularly dangerous position.
Correct. So here's the point I bring up, or here's the reason why we bring up this point. Wizards of the Coast is a business. They are a subsidiary of Hasbro, and again, I know how to read. I have been on the internet. Hasbro recently has dipped slightly in their earnings, maybe more than slightly.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest retail toy chains in the nation just went bankrupt. So the toy company of Hasbro having lost some money is unsurprising to me.
Right. In fact, I'm surprised that they didn't lose more based on that.
Right. And when a company like Hasbro talks to their investors and gives them figures and says that the game of Magic has grown in size in the last 5 years, if they were found to have been lying about that, they would be in huge trouble with their investors. Huge trouble. So that is very unlikely a lie, because that's some provable stuff.
Right.
And so you can't throw numbers like that around, you know, or even just broad statements like it has grown. If you look at numbers relating to that, they could get in big trouble with their investors. And so no intelligent legal department for any multi-million-dollar company in the United States or really anywhere else would allow a company to release a statement to their shareholders stating growth when there has not been growth, and in fact there has been the opposite.
Right, unless it's like a money laundering scheme or something.
Which I doubt Hasbro is. That's a pretty big company.
No.
So, but with relation to that, it is a business. Wizards of the Coast is the subsidiary, of Hasbro, the child company, if you will, wholly owned subsidiary, whatever you want to call it. But they are a business. And from a business standpoint, it makes perfect sense that they would take their artist model that they have had of commissioning artists to work on art for their cards and having an art director who is the master of dictating that's close enough, or you should rework that, bring it back with another draft soon, or redraws or whatever you want to call it. And moving that model over to their authors and saying, we're going to find established talent. Because again,
it's an interesting concept. It's an interesting concept because obviously the model has worked famously with artists since forever, since the conception of Magic, basically, because their art has always, from day one, been impeccable.
Yes.
It's changed through the years, but it's always been top-notch.
And that's not every piece of art, right? There will be people who will be like, what about this one? And they'll show you one of the handful, because they do exist, of bad art. Because it exists, right? Every once in a while, either the artist will have a bad day or Wizards picked the wrong person, they weren't right for it, they were pressed for time. Who knows?
Maybe the concept that they came up with for this art was a little too abstract or something, where it doesn't necessarily make too much sense with what the card is and does. Whatever it is.
The art direction might not have been clear, whatever. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. But looking at that, and then extrapolating it out to stories as well, you see where you might run into issues, like continuity issues, etc. And that's why I said I would be referring to Nick as the art director or the story director akin to an art director. Right. Because he is going to be the one to say, oh, that story's not quite what we were looking for from Chandra's perspective. This is more along the lines of what Chandra would say in those situations, and then send them back with as much clarification as he can and ask them to redo it or tweak things or what have you.
But I feel like there's a lot more opportunities for there to be mess-ups, as you're saying, because basically a picture is a picture. And when you are giving a concept for a picture. It's one concept, right? You're giving one concept for one picture, and the result is one picture.
Right.
But when you're giving a concept for a writing piece, there's a lot more to that than it just being a picture.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more opportunities for things to go awry, especially if you only literally have one guy that all of these different writers are filtering through, and they might even, as you said before, be overlapping in terms of timing.
Right. And
which really just puts a lot of stuff on his plate, as well as making the stories just quite simply not as good.
Yeah. And it's problematic, but the direction that they're going in. And so there's one of two ways to look at this, right? You can be upset because a business, which at the end of the day needs to please their investors and it needs to please their wallets, if you will, right? To use the broad term of wallet. They need to please their wallets and to please their investors, and so they can get rid of 7 people and replace them with one person and contract out to others or private contractors or what have you to lessen the financial burden, especially for something like the Magic Stories, which does not earn them much money at all.
Yeah.
Because it gets you clicks on your website, which can sometimes earn you some ad money if there are advertisements on your website, but otherwise you are trying to get people, like Amy mentioned appropriately, you're trying to get people to click on other articles, which will get them interested in new sets coming out, which will get them to actually purchase your product, but that's a lot of steps.
Yeah.
And there are many Vorthos out there, and this is not a problem for the Vorthos, because you can be whatever kind of a Vorthos you want, but there are many Vorthos out there who may just read the stories. They may look at the card spoilers or the previews or whatever you want to call it, or the full card list after the fact. Maybe they go play in some drafts, but they don't purchase product. They don't go to GPs. They don't buy booster boxes. They don't buy bundles. They don't go to their local card shop and have a play group that they meet up with. There's so many different, obviously, many different ways to play Magic, but
there's many different ways to love Magic.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be playing.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So, go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
And so I think that's Wizards' way of almost trying to branch out, not necessarily to new people solely, but to people who are already part of the Magic community who just don't branch out to all of the different things that Magic does. They do so many things. And so in order to get me to go out and buy a booster box, they want to release all that information the same day I'm going to be on their website reading the story. Because I like reading those stories. I don't like shelling out money for cards.
And and yet...
And I don't really play the game.
Right.
So it's... You know, it makes sense to them to try and gain me as a player, as someone who is already... Someone who loves the game, even though I don't play the game.
So, and I think that this concept of multiple people leaving to be replaced by one person and how the story is going to go forward into the future, that kind of jumped to the forefront of everyone's knowledge when Kelly Diggs left. Because Kelly, as I mentioned at the beginning, towards the beginning of this video, Kelly and Ethan were the main guys who were super knowledgeable on Dominaria. Kelly had been around for a very long time in the company. And one day, he left. And he tweeted, "I'm sorry to have gone, and I'm looking for work." And there's probably not much more than that he can say, because when you do have other large creators from that have worked with Wizards of the Coast on many different things, saying to Kelly, "Wow, so sorry to see you go, hope everything is okay," as Amy said, that's not an expected leave.
No.
That's not a, "Hey guys, it's cool, I'm leaving, it was my time, I'm moving on to other things, whatever." No, it's not. And that's unfortunate, because Kelly did some damn good work, and especially for Dominaria, which is, again, a set that you don't want to screw up. And he did some great work, and a lot of people thanked him, and then the company thanked him by letting him go. And unfortunately, that's not new. That's maybe it's new for Wizards this soon after such a success of a set, but it's not new in this country. It's not new this day and age.
It's also not new for Wizards. I mean, they've already let go all these other people on your list here. And...
Right. And again, some of them left of their own accord, but who's to say whether that was the company giving them a heads up,
right,
or whether that was that person being savvy enough to see the writing on the wall.
Right. And how many times has that happened?
Right. And that's pure, once again, pure speculation, but not unheard of.
Right.
By any means.
Most of the jobs that I've left have been, the reason has been because a major shift was taking place in terms of just the way business was being run. And so I left, and then, a few months later come to find out, oh, a different company bought it, or there's a new CEO, or they're just completely revamping the positions that exist, getting rid of the existing positions and creating new ones. Just whatever it is.
And thank you, Amy, for bringing that up, because I knew this and completely forgot to mention it for some reason. If you look back to the release of Kaladesh, believe it was the release of Kaladesh, I could be wrong, but around 2 years ago or so, you had all of those people that I mentioned down here, to my knowledge, still worked for the company.
Yeah.
And
maybe Kimberly Cryness was like...
No, she was there.
For Kaladesh?
She was.
Okay.
Because I remember her being in one of the Kaladesh videos.
Okay.
In fact, the reason I bring it up is because when they released Kaladesh or previewed Kaladesh, it was like this big thing on a stage at like a GP or a PAX or a con or something. I don't exactly remember, unfortunately. But
okay, no, I do remember what you're talking about now.
But those videos that they made, one of the videos that they made for that was to introduce their new CEO. And I remember mentioning this to you, so thank you for bringing that up. Again, who's to say whether that is definitively why that happened, that these changes happened over the last 2 years or not, but that is seemingly around the time that they started.
Right.
And again, not unheard of. I believe the new CEO's first name is Chris. I could be wrong on that as well. And again, that's not to disparage the new CEO. That's not to pat him on the back for a job well done either. It's just to say, it's, currently 2018, back then 2015, 2016, whatever it was, a new CEO comes in, and following his entrance into Wizards of the Coast, you have these big changes.
Firings.
And well, right.
Firings and rehirings.
Restructuring is the
Great.
buzzword that likes to be used.
Yes.
And that's unfortunate. And yet, and I think for us in the Vorthos community, because this big of a change happened on Dominaria, we noticed it that much more. Which is poor planning, possibly, on Wizards' part, that maybe you could have waited a set. Maybe you couldn't have. But for M19 to be written by a new author, to have that be your jumping off point for this new form of storytelling, would have made a hell of a lot more sense to me.
Yeah.
But that's me.
But also, if you think about the stories that happened right before, a majority of them were being written by Alison Luhrs.
Well, that was the ones right before Dominaria, yes, but that's also because they had started implementing the releases or firings or whatever you want to call it. I mean, at that point, Kimberly Kreines was gone, Michael E. Chow was gone, Mel Lee was gone.
That's what I'm saying. If they had waited until after Dominaria, I mean, there would have been... It would have been too difficult. I'm going to assume it would have been too difficult for Alison to have written all of those stories as well.
Right, I think maybe
Especially since I assume she hasn't been there that long.
Well, maybe I'll rephrase. To have let all of them go.
Yeah.
And it was
like
sprinkled...
if you knew that Dominaria was coming...
Nope, Dominaria, you had it right the first time.
Was coming up. Why would you do... wait until that's over. And seemingly that's what they did with Kelly Diggs. They used him up. They saved him until they were done using his potential for Dominaria, and then they just...
And I think that's why it was such an outcry from the Vorthos community. But to be completely honest, as I said, with all these other names, this is something that we've been aware of for a while.
Right.
I think Kelly is just that moment of the straw that broke the camel's back, because you had good people there that were let go, or, again, that left. Whether that was because of a heads up, whether that was because they saw the writing on the wall, or whether that's because they got damn lucky.
Right.
I don't know. But those that left to get other jobs, or because of other jobs, they're fine. Right? They're doing other things. And I encourage you to look up those people and follow them on social media and see what they're doing. Heck, if you have connections in the industry and can help some of these people out, don't hesitate to contact them privately. Make sure that it's something legitimate, and don't string them along or use them, because that's kind of just what they went through.
Yeah.
But if you know somebody, help them out. These are good people. You can't deny their portfolios because they exist on the website.
Right, and they're incredible.
So that's the point that I want to end on. I really would love any and all opinions related to anything that we talked about today. Right. I feel like this wrap-up was longer than most, if not all, of our episodes, but I think it's because this is a discussion that we've pushed off for weeks. I mean, you can go back to prior JaARs and you can hear me being like, we're going to talk about that later because we're talking about this story, not all of it. Right. So now that we got to talk about all of it, there was a lot to unpack. And so thank you for bearing with us if you're still here. I hope that you thought that this was a pertinent discussion to have. Yeah. Hopefully you can get involved in the discussion down in the comments below.
Yeah, maybe there's something about just the restructuring.
Well, okay,
that we're coining it.
So
we don't know that that's necessarily what it was. But maybe you know something about that and you want to leave it in the comments for us, or maybe you just want to leave in the comments, your own story of how that's happened to you in the past.
Here's the other thing that I wanted to say, and hopefully there are still people here. Most, if not all, of our viewers and commenters, etc., seem to have their heads on straight. But if it needs to be said, please don't harass anyone. Just because we've given our opinion on what we think has happened, and even what we've said is likely to have happened, that doesn't mean that anyone deserves to be ridiculed or harassed or anything. Like I said, I don't fault the company for any of these decisions. It sucks.
It's pretty typical.
Yes. And as fans of the authors and of the original writers of these stories, it sucks to have seen them go. and I wish them nothing but the best for every last person mentioned and anyone else who we may have missed. And if we did miss someone, let us know in the comments below. But please don't harass anyone. That's completely uncalled for and unnecessary. And something that I don't think I have to say, because I think that everyone here is intelligent enough, and I don't think that anyone could or should read into what we said that those people deserve to be harassed, because that's really inappropriate.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it
oddly malicious, so
right,
please don't.
and I'm saying it for our benefit, sure, but for theirs as well. They don't deserve it, and like I said, I don't think that anyone would, but you never know. So I wanted to at least put that out there. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all if you hung out with us all throughout Dominaria.
Yeah.
If these were your first sets of JaAR videos that you watched, welcome.
Thank you for starting.
Yes, hopefully you will stick around. We have probably a little bit of time before M19 starts, but like I said, we have Magic Story podcasts to go over. We have the Battle Bond preview article about the world of Kylem that was released today that we didn't get a chance to talk about. There's plenty to tide us over until the M19 stories start, and then once again we will go from there onto Ravnica and the 3 Ravnica sets that I'm very much looking forward to.
So we are still planning on having a video every week.
We're going to try.
Correct?
We're going to try our best. If other Vorthos-related things come out on Wednesdays, as they tend to do, we will see if we can incorporate those things and talk about those. So stay tuned to the channel. The best way to do that is to subscribe. That button, our logo, will appear right up here. I love that you look at it. It's so great. The logo will appear right here.
I hate it. I hate it so much.
There will be videos that might pop up above Amy's head, above mine. Who knows? Check those out as well. Please share this with some of your friends if you want to have that discussion or continue that discussion with them. It helps us out. It helps us to grow, but it also helps to add more people to the discussion.
Right.
And
please leave those comments down below. It's great to hear from you. It's great for other viewers to hear from you and see that you care and that you're leaving comments and that what you have to say might be similar to what they're thinking, or maybe even the complete opposite, something that they never would have thought of.
Right.
It is helpful to us. It is helpful to them. It's helpful to the community as a whole. And I think it would be a great place to have that conversation with your friend. Instead of just talking to your friend about it, leave it in the comments, and then your friend can respond, and then someone else who doesn't know you can respond, you know, and make that conversation reach more people. Yeah.
So, once again, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed this episode of JaAR as we and you, in a meta way today, showed off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
That's possibly the last one for Dominaria, most likely. Although, well, no, we have the story, the story podcast. So, anyway, this has been another episode of JaAR here on Geek for All. Thank you guys so much for watching. I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.